trying to get the pictures of the people off my screen so I can see more easily what's going on. Okay, here we go. This is continuing our Ollie series from the Butte County Master Gardener Program, and I'm sure Joyce has explained that already, so I won't go into details on that. And my topic today is going to be Firewise landscaping in Northern California, primarily defensible space. And I'm guessing that at least some of you who are logged in this afternoon, it's actually morning there, some of you that are logged in have had firsthand experience with the fire and defensible space. I've just last year, I was on alert 3 times and evacuated once where I live up in the Oroville foothills. So I have never come any closer to losing my home than the fire being about little less than a mile away. But I know the trauma. I have many friends who have experienced the trauma firsthand. So that's kind of what motivated me to research this topic and perhaps help people in the future plan more effectively. So we had 2017, 2018, and 2020, and now they're warning us that 2021 could be just as bad drought-wise. The only positive thing I've read is that so much is burned already in Butte County that we probably won't have the size of the fires that we've had in the past just because there's less to burn. And University of California, I love this quote, creating and maintaining defensible space is critical for the protection of homes. And by the way, if you have questions, you can either do them on chat or we'll pause every few minutes and Emily can sort of moderate that. So I'm guessing everybody recognized the Enterprise Bridge. This unfortunately was Paradise. And this was up at the car fire in the Redding area. Okay. This, by the way, defensible space was mandated by the California Public Resources Code 4291. If you want to look it up and go into a lot more detail, it was in 2005. If you look up CPRC 4291, it'll give you the details if you're interested. The area around a house in which any type of arrangement, an arrangement of vegetation has been altered so that it is defensible by firefighters during a wildfire. And I just love the drama of this picture. This is a very defensible space. You can see minimal vegetation. And if there is vegetation, it's short, moist grass. And even though this was in a wildland area, this home was saved. And I can see the firefighters thinking, we're going to be able to save this one. I did fight wildland fires a couple summers when I was in college. And I do know firsthand that if you have a home that is defensible and a home that probably isn't, you're going to make your stand on the one you think you can save. So your home is going to be less likely to burn. And also firefighters, it protects firefighters. If they're fighting a fire, they want their back covered. So the defensible space is important for both you and the people who are trying to save your home. Okay, a little bit about fire behavior so that defensible space will make more sense what the rules are and why. And you can see from this fire triangle, fire behavior is determined by weather, topography, and fuels. Okay, we can't do anything about the weather except complain. Topography would be terrain, that would be hills, flat, aspect, which way it faces, elevation, altitude. Can't do anything about that. We can do something about fuels. Not fuel moisture, if it's close enough to your home that you can irrigate, that will help. Fuel temperature, again, if it's been irrigated or you have it shady, then it's going to affect the fuel. And then the fuel characteristics, what type of plants, what type of fuel is there. Now, fire spreads horizontally and vertically. So first, you can see that if you have plants that are connected like this, growing into each other, that the fire is going to easily be transmitted across those plants. If you put a break in there, thin your vegetation out, or if you're planting your landscape, plant it so that they are going to be far apart. that will help. Now, my problem is I started landscaping 30 something years ago in the place I live, and some of my plants are way too close, and it's sort of heartrending to try and make my home more fire safe by taking out some plants that are 20 or 30 years old. So I understand that. You do the best you can is basically what CAL FIRE has sort of talked to me. I've talked to several of the CAL FIRE personnel about this. Fire also spreads horizontally. If fuels grow in layers so that they allow the growth of fire up into neighboring plants' crowns, that's called a fuel ladder. And you can see what happens with a fuel ladder over here in this bottom right picture, that if you have low fuels and then you have ladder fuels, the fire is going to go right up into the crown. So this one, I don't think the artist quite understood. These tree limbs should probably have been cut off. I'm not good enough at Photoshop to take those limbs off, so I'll just use my cursor to cut them off like so. You want it to be at least 6 feet above the vegetation below it to make it an effective block of that fire ladder. And then a little bit more about fire behavior. If you've ever watched a fire climb a hill, it is amazing how fast fires can grow. When I was in high school, I lived down in the Los Angeles area and near the Santa Monica Mountains, and we'd happen to have a fire, a moderately sized fire a few weeks before, and then another one came through adjacent to the existing burn. I was sitting watching a fire creep down a mountainside, and it took 20 minutes to get down this hillside, and I'd say less than 2 minutes to burn uphill after it reached the valley floor. Main reason for this is fires create their own updraft. As the heat rises from a fire, the existing surrounding air comes in from all directions, and so you get this upslope wind. It's sort of what we call a chimney effect. If you have a box canyon, it's exaggerated because the air is channeled directly up the canyon. One of the things I was taught when I was being trained as a firefighter is never, ever get in front or uphill from a fire. You attack it from the sides as you try to pinch it off, but never, ever get in front of a fire because it'll move so quickly, unbelievably fast. Okay, now I'm going to talk about 3 different approaches to defensible space. This is the original bill from 2005, CPRC 4291, and it talks about what is defensible space and what do you do in certain areas of your defensible space. The original idea was 2 zones. Zone 1 was the first 30 feet around your house, and then zone 2 was from 30 out to 100 feet. And then you had your property line would, if the 100 feet stopped, if the 100 feet was greater than your property line, then it stopped wherever that was. Okay, that's slightly changed. We'll get to that in a few minutes. Okay. Now, as you can see, the zone 1, it's pretty common sense. Okay, you're not going to have dry leaves and pine needles from your roof, your yard, and your rain gutters. Rain gutters are a very common way that house fires start because a lot of people don't keep them clean. You also want to keep branches a minimum of 10 feet from other trees if you can. CAL FIRE says they're not going to require you to cut down trees that are closer than 10 feet, but they encourage you to at least limb those trees up so that you don't have a ladder to get into that crown in the first place. And then it says remove branches that hang over your roof and keep dead branches 10 feet away from your chimney. Well, what I've been doing in my home personally is keeping branches 10 feet away from the roof, period, not just the chimney. And then relocate wood piles into zone 2. We'll talk about that in a minute as well. Again, common sense. If you've got flammable plants near your windows, that's another key access point for fire, because what happens is the glass heats up to the point where it breaks. And so if you can keep flame away from the windows so that they don't break, then your odds of your house burning down are going to be lowered. So you want to, again, you don't want vegetation under your deck or wood piles and so forth, because if it does catch on fire, that's another point of egress for your ingress for your fire. Okay. So again, common sense. Now we go to zone 2. Now we're going out from 30 to 100 feet. And like I say, that may be shorter if your property line cuts that off. Annual grasses should be mowed down to a maximum of 4 inches. I'm a bit of a native plant enthusiast. So what I do is I have a lot of grass on my property, a lot of native grasses, and also just some invasives. And so I also have wildflowers. So I wait until the wildflowers have had a chance to bloom. The grass is still green, but you can tell it's starting to turn, and that's when I mow. So I at least give my natives a chance to set seed before I cut everything down. You want horizontal spacing between the shrubs and trees. I'm going to talk about that in just a second, how much spacing you should do, and the same with the vertical spacing for the fire ladders. And again, here you're going to have, this is where you might have leaves. I have oak trees on my property and a couple of pines. And so once you get out into this area here in zone 2, you can keep it about a maximum of 3 inches. Now, I'm guessing people can see me. So what I'm going to show you is this is how I measure the depth. If you look at this, if you put your finger down into the duff, the leaves and twigs, this is about 3 inches. And so it's a good way to see if you're too deep or not, as far as estimating how deep to leave the twigs and branches and so forth out in this zone surrounding your house. All right, now that was the law up until about 2000, well, from 2005 until present. UC Research, the Department of Agriculture, and then this is the biggie, the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. These are the folks that your insurance companies pay attention to. And so they have added a third zone, even though it's zone 1, it's the first 5 feet around your house. And it goes by different names, the immediate zone, the non-combustible zone. Then zone 2 would be the 5 to 30 feet. So that's our old zone 1 under CAL FIRE, basically. Also called the intermediate zone, the lean, clean, and green zone, or some other names for it. And then finally, out to about 100 feet is the reduced fuel zone. It's the extended zone, the wildland fuel reduction zone, or some other names that it goes by. So the big difference, though, is going to be this guy right here. Now, if you're looking at zone 1, the goal is to keep what they've discovered through their research is that if you can keep flames at least 5 feet away from your house, so the flames are not licking your house, the likelihood of the house burning goes way, way, way down. They say don't put any plants there, but if you do, small, fleshy, moist plants are encouraged. And you can see this zone actually extends it even more, because you have the 5 feet here, you've got, looks like about another 8 to 10 feet here, and then you've got green sod beyond that. So these folks are taking it very seriously. And you can see some of the things you can put in that make it look nice. Non-combustible mulches like rock, gravel, and so forth. Broken concrete is something I've been looking into. It's not really available. I've played around with just some old concrete I had and put that around plants. The reason I like it is it's a lot easier as far as if you're mowing and blowing, it's a lot easier to blow leaves off of chunks of concrete than it is from little stones. It doesn't blow that far away. Okay. And zone 2, the firebreak zone, you want a landscape that is ignited. It won't transmit the fire to the home. So this is going to be spacing. Now, the only thing I worry about this looks very good right now, but this looks like these two look like lantanas. They're going to get much larger. This fountain grass is probably going to get a lot larger. So you want to, when you're planning your landscape, maybe move the plants away. And if I were teaching this class in person, I'd be asking you these questions like, what do you see that's wrong here? Okay, according to what we just learned, what do you want here instead of a bunch of plants? You want an open zone or much lower, fleshier plants than you see here. So that's this zone right here, the 5 to 30 feet. And then we come out here to the wildland or fuel reduction zone. But before we get there, things you want to consider not keeping right next to your house are fuel sources. Okay, propane and gasoline probably here. Propane tanks, there's a reason why propane tanks have to be located at least 30 feet from your home. Shrubs, woody shrubs, a lot of dead material inside, not a good idea. And now I said I was going to mention something about wood piles. You see this a lot, might be okay midwinter. Not a good idea during fire season. I did some converting BTUs in gasoline and BTUs in firewood. Turns out 1 cord of wood has the heat equivalent of 170 gallons of gasoline. Now, I doubt if anyone would put 170 gallons of gas on their front porch, but they think nothing of putting a cord or two of wood, which is basically the same thing. Okay, horizontal spacing. If you are on flat terrain, the rule of thumb is space is 2 times the height of the plant between plants. So for instance, if this plant is 2 feet tall, you'd have a 4-foot space here. And with trees, a minimum of 10 feet between trees. This is on flat terrain. Now, as soon as you get a slope with that updraft pushing the flames upward, you have to increase the distance. Here it's 4 feet, so a 2-foot high shrub would be 8 feet apart, okay? And double the distance for a moderate slope for tree spacing. This is, again, if you're planting the trees, it's pretty hard to cut down existing trees, at least it is for me. But something to keep in mind as you're landscaping, and if you are planning on thinning out your landscape, these are the rules to go by. Okay, and then still doing this now, vertical spacing instead of horizontal on a flat surface. 6-foot minimum clearance, as I mentioned. And if you do have plants underneath, say I have some azaleas underneath a large conifer, the azaleas are maybe 4 feet tall. So 3 times that, limb the tree 12 feet above those azaleas. So again, you're trying to keep the fire from getting up into the crown where it can spread to your roof and so forth. And still in zone 2, the lean, clean, green approach. And I sort of space them so that there's very little fuel connecting. And all this, I'm assuming that everybody got my outline, so you have all of these, this info at your fingertips if you need it. And this is one that I try to do each year, sort of work my way through my garden, and any dead material, prune it out so that if we did have a fire, at least there wouldn't be nice, dry, small diameter fuel ready for it. And again, in this 0 to 30 feet, irrigation is important. Keep those plants well watered, which is difficult because we're also dealing with drought where they're going to tell you not to water as much. So a good idea there is maybe go with drips because you're using much less water to do the same amount of irrigating on plants. Okay, finally in zone 3, now you're not only, your main objective is to slow the fire down. And so you may not be irrigating heavily, but you are still working on spacing the plants like you did in zone 2. And any spacing, try to break the canopy apart if you can. If you can't, at least limb the trees up so that they're 3 times what you have as far as shrub height. And in other words, and I've talked to CAL FIRE, they say they actually aren't the enforcement agency. They are they try to educate the public and encourage them to do what would be best for home safety. If they find somebody that with an egregious violation of these rules, then they will referred on to the county enforcement. So CAL FIRE is actually on your side. They're really working to help you save your home. I like this picture. You can see these plants are all low. The trees, for the most part, are limbed up. That's something I do each year. I noticed I had all my oak trees limbed up at least 8 feet above the ground last fall. And now with spring, the new growth and so forth, I've got several where it's down maybe 6 feet. So I'm going to have to go back through with the loppers and do that as well. Now, this is where I had questions the last time I gave this talk, so I've added this section. This is Butte County Fire Prevention and Protection Ordinance 38A. And this is what CAL FIRE is responsible for. It does not cover city limits. Your own particular town will have its own ways of addressing this, but this would be the unincorporated areas of Butte County. As I said, they focus on education and encouraging voluntary compliance. They're not out to get you, they're out to help you. And so you can see wherever there isn't a little dot, this is what CAL FIRE is responsible for. All of that green area that isn't city is CAL FIRE's responsibility. And then one other thing, before we get into the details of that, if you're going to use mulches, and a lot of us do because it keeps down the weeds, conserves soil moisture, and in drought times, that's good. Unfortunately, my favorite mulch, because it really is effective in keeping down the weeds, is this is shredded fir bark. The problem is whenever you shred something, you make its surface area to volume ratio much higher. And so you end up with very good tinder for starting a fire. If an ember lands on this bark, it's much easier to ignite it. Large chips, you have to go with a thicker layer, but they don't ignite as easily. If they do ignite, they will smolder. So that's one thing to keep in mind. You don't want mulches like this close to your house. It could smolder for hours, even if it doesn't ignite. Other hardscapes that you could use to make effective fire breaks: driveways, pathways of cement, asphalt, decomposed granite, and so forth. Ponds, water features, walls, all of these things are fire breaks. And make sure we're doing okay on time. Now getting back to the Butte County Fire Protection and Prevention Ordinance, okay, basically it adds our original CAL FIRE 4291. It just adds that ember resistant zone. So it steals from the Insurance Institute of Business and Home Safety, Zone 1. It adds that, so it encourages hardscapes and plants with higher moisture content low to the ground. Okay, so that's as far as you as a homeowner is concerned and your landscape. This is the key difference between what CAL FIRE has been enforcing and what it will be enforcing, is this right here. But there's a couple other things as well. Most of it is it affects developers, things like roads and so forth. But as a homeowner, these are your responsibilities that they're going to be looking at and asking you to voluntarily comply with. Butte County the Fire Prevention Ordinance also says you are responsible for clearing hazardous vegetation when within 100 feet of a building on an adjacent parcel. So in other words, if your neighbor is a hoarder of building materials like mine, he's responsible for making sure that all of his stuff is no closer than 100 feet from my home. So that is a big difference. And they also encourage you to clear hazardous vegetation within 10 feet of a roadway or your driveway. Now for rural homes, this could be a lifesaver. If you have a 10-foot fire break on either side of the road, like you can see here, this could very easily save your life if you're trying to escape during a wildfire. The tree should be limbed, and you can see there's been some very effective clearing here. The trees are limbed, the underbrush has been cleared, and so forth. And so that's the key. The two key differences in this ordinance over the existing one from 2005 are that 5-foot zone next to the house, and then the clearing of driveways and roadways in front of your house. And you are responsible for not endangering your neighbor. What they're encouraging here is a neighborhood-wide effort to make the entire neighborhood defensible. And I'm guessing that communities may start doing this as a buffer zone outside or at the city limits to sort of follow this advice and also make the entire town safer. Now those are the laws, those are the rules, and we're going to be a few minutes. We're going to have to slow down. I want to give time for questions, but Firewise isn't fireproof. That's why we said Firewise landscape design, because nothing. Whoop, let me put it back. For some reason, it wants to jump. So let me go back, way back. Okay. Anything that's organic, anything that was once living can burn. And Firewise plants are easier to maintain and they stay put. Too many plants of any kind makes bad fuel. This is Dr. Kate Wilkin. Until recently, she was at UC Davis and was an advisor for CAL FIRE on these sorts of things. So Firewise plants make sense. They're going to be relatively slow to ignite and burn. Moist, supple leaves, watery sap. They tend not to accumulate dead material beneath the plant. So most of your annuals would fall into this. They're not plants that escape and colonize easily. They have limited self-propagation. If they don't make more plants, they're not making more fuel. They can be pruned to one stem. Again, the more branching you have, the more surface area you have for fire. And then deciduous plants tend to be less flammable than evergreens. So if you have a choice between an oak and a pine tree, their advice is plant an oak because it's deciduous and it won't ignite as easily. It doesn't have the resins and so forth that conifers do. Now, drought-tolerant native plants often hoard water. And if you do have a fire, they're more likely to recover from fire than non-natives. They tend to crown sprout, which means if you have a burnt stump, you'll see young plants regrowing from that. Succulents, generally considered Firewise. Here's a succulent down here. These are bulbs, by the way, and they're natives. Succulents have a high water content, and because of that, they're very unlikely to ignite and burn. There is one exception to that, and that's ice plant, and I'll have a picture of that soon. It tends to accumulate dead material, and the new growth piles up on top of it. So there's a lot of dead material in ice plant, so it's not a very good choice if you're looking for Firewise garden. Not going to spend a ton of time on these because we are limited, but they're all listed in your outlines. If you don't have them now, I'm sure Ollie will get them to you soon. And I'll just show you, these are examples of ground covers that would be good. All of these tend to be low growing, don't accumulate much dead material. And because of that, are reasonable for ground covers. You wouldn't want to put ground covers like this in the 5-foot zone, but in the 5 to 30-foot zone, they'd be very appropriate. Okay, perennials, again, if you see a star, it's a California native. And so you can get some pretty beautiful landscaping and still stick with plants that are a little bit more drought tolerant. All of these are drought tolerant. Columbine prefers shade. These guys are full sun. Iris will take full sun or shade. And yarrow is a nice full sun plant. Now, black and blue sage is not a native, but it is a fairly common landscape plant. Then we have more flowering plants, bulbs, freesias, purple sage, pineapple sage, hostas, that'd be good for shade, coneflower, echina. They die back every year, so you can prune them back as fire season approaches and not have to worry about them. Coreopsis, again, they can get leggy if you, but if you prune them, they respond well to it. Daylilies, another bulb. And then coral bales, again, another native. Ceanothus, Can get woody, but again, it responds well to pruning. Does not like much summer water at all. In fact, you can overwater ceanothus in the summer. Barberry, mock orange, these are all natives. They all are beautiful plants. Bush monkey flower, very moist, a lot of moisture in the stems. Spirea, island bush poppy. This is from the Channel Islands, and not a real common plant, but a very beautiful plant. And it also responds well to pruning. Has these poppy flowers all over it. It is a true poppy, but it's a bush poppy. Okay, cinquefoil azaleas, very popular in Butte County. Butterfly bush can, if you don't prune it, it can be a problem as far as producing a lot of material. We'll go through these, just giving you an idea of plants you can use in your landscape. Succulents that are useful. This is ice plant if you're not familiar with it. And underneath this is a ton of dead material. The others, quite acceptable. Trees, notice our 3 native oaks to our area. If you're up in the higher elevations, well, I should say above about 1,000, 1,500 feet, you're going to get black oaks like Paradise, valley oaks in the valley floor, and blue oaks would be the ones we find in the low foothills, the Oroville area, for example. And as you can see, whoops, this is just super sensitive here. We'll go back. The blue oak problem here, they've got a nice, beautiful manzanita plant, but they're ignoring a rule here, which is don't provide ladder fuels. So that's something you'd want to avoid. Some nice Firewise plants here. Just seeing the red bud finishing up. Smoke trees just starting as far as the bloom goes. We're done with our citrus flowers, but I mean with our citrus fruit for the most part, but we're getting the flowers right now. Toyon, again, properly pruned. Keep the dead material out of your toyon plants, and it can produce a lot of duff, so be sure you monitor that. Coast redwoods do fairly well in Butte County, and they are one of the few evergreens, conifers that are reasonable as far as landscaping in a fire area. I would limb this tree up at least 6 feet rather than have it low to the ground like this, even though it does look nice like that. Now, highly flammable plants. If they reproduce prolifically like fountain grass and feather grass, those are probably not a good idea because they're just producing, look at this fine fuel. And things like, I think this looks like rosemary maybe. Look at the fuel inside of every rosemary bush if you were to cut it away, the outside growth. Conifers, large amount of litter beneath the plant. And even though they are beautiful trees, eucalyptus they're non-native. They tend to suck the moisture out of the soil so that other plants can't even compete with them. And they've got this shaggy bark, which is just inviting fire. Plus, their sap is full of oils, which burn readily. Volatile waxes, terpenes, or oils, like pines. These are aromatic, emit a strong odor, sagebrush, lavender, okay, and pines. And so you can see, not a good idea for a number of reasons, these guys here. Okay, some of the conifers you don't want to deal with, cedars, pines, Italian cypress, they are so dense and not a good idea. Junipers, I'm having an ongoing battle with my wife. I've eliminated about 10 junipers, but there's still a couple she won't let me touch. But I have been working on that over the years. I think this goes without explaining why palm trees are not a good idea. Feathergrass, look at the surface area, how easily that would be to ignite. Dry annual grasses, which we're all going to have within the next month or so, if you have any, you're living outside of city limits anywhere. Broom, it's coming back like gangbusters in the Paradise area. I haven't heard what's happening in Berry Creek, Brush Creek yet, but it's not a native. It produces a tremendous amount of fuel and it burns readily. Okay, then we want to maintain our defensible space. Irrigation is important. Removing excess debris is important. Pruning branches away from not just the chimney, but the roof itself. And then don't let flammable materials accumulate either in your gutters or on your decks. And a good solution to this is gutter screens or gutter covers. They're very effective at keeping leaves out. You still may get leaves accumulating in valleys, but again, you can, during fire season, I'm up on my roof probably at least 3 or 4 times, just making sure there's no leaves accumulated around my gutters or my the valleys of my roof. So things to keep in mind. And that, I know I rushed a little bit, but I wanted to have a few minutes for questions, and hopefully there'll be some. Let me go back to that. I don't know why this keeps hopping, going the wrong way. If you want to look at the Butte County ordinance, this bottom link is it. The rest of these are Butte Fire, UCAR, Sonoma State. Each one of these is where I got a lot of my information from. Plus, I did coordinate closely with the fire captain in charge of inspection in Butte County. So hopefully this has been helpful, and I hope I have some questions. So Emily, I guess the next step is you, if you want to go ahead and, do we have any questions? First of all, I can only see a couple of you. If you want to put on your video or ask me a question directly, that would be fine. Just unmute your audio, and I'd be happy to answer questions.
And you can also stop sharing your screen, and then you'll be able to see everyone if you wanted to do that.
I can stop sharing. Thank you for that hint. So, anybody, I'd be happy to answer questions. It's a small group. You have a big advantage here.
I just want to say that that was the best visual presentation. And I think you need to go on the road in California. That was fabulous. I mean, I've seen it by my local, things like this by my local fire chief and, trying to develop a Firewise neighborhood. But this was just really very wonderfully succinct and visual and clear. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Very good. That was my goal, because living in the foothills, I'd been saying for years, Paradise was a disaster waiting to happen. And so now we have the opportunity with a clean slate to start over and maybe do it right, so that it never happens again. That's my hope. But,
do you have any thoughts on what's the big issue with manzanita and California not allowing people to, cut manzanita itself? I mean, that's one of the biggest fire hazards around.
it is, and I really don't. In fact, I live on the hill directly opposite Orville Dam, which is, I think, is why we've been so safe, because we've got the lake and the river between us and most fires. And what I've noticed is a lot of my manzanita is dying off over the last few years too. So it's even a worse fuel hazard than it was. I don't know, maybe it's just because it's a protected species, and that may be something that needs to be discussed. But,
I know a lot of people kind of take it out on the sly, and I think the fire guys kind of wink at it because they know the issues. But
I don't think Cal Fire's going to go after you unless it's a wholesale bulldozing type of thing. But just if you're willing to share, how many of you do live in the unincorporated county areas? Just a show of hands, if you would. Is anybody? Okay, so most of you are within city limits, so not as dire a need for this for you as, say, others like me, but I'm sure you know somebody who does live out in the county. Most of us do. So I had in the order of 30 friends lose their homes between Berry Creek and Paradise. So it's just been awful, awful. Any others? Happy to answer them.
Well, I was just thinking about that question about manzanita.
Mhm.
Before I moved here, I had an acre in Monterey County and it was mostly manzanita. And what I remember, because I did a lot of pruning on some that were closer to the house, but there was a lot of dry, dead stuff that I had to stay on.
Yeah,
So I'm
yeah.
thinking that's probably the concern in terms of the fires. There's a lot of dead, but it also is a major hummingbird
Yeah.
factory. Those pink blossoms this time of year are constantly visited by hummingbirds. So
Another positive thing about manzanita, if you do have a fire, is that it crown sprouts. It's a major crown sprouter. Once the fire's gone through, the roots will send up new manzanita plants all within the first season. As soon as they get some rain, you'll see new manzanitas growing prolifically.
So also just to be aware, there are folks in the group that are out of the area, Bay Area, Mendocino, so not just in Butte County.
Yeah, yeah. The similar situations, in fact, some of the information I got from this originally was from the Sonoma Master Gardeners and the CSU Sonoma State. They've been doing a lot of work, especially the Sonoma Master Gardeners in cooperation with UC on fire prevention. And they've actually, and I think I've got that site up here, I'm almost positive. They've actually developed landscape plans for different types of home sites. I think it's 5 or 6 that you can just say, here's your plan. This is what you plant here and here and here, and how close together and so forth. So it's pretty amazing.
Does anybody else have anything they want to share or ask?
Is that Kendall?
Kendall?
Yeah, hi. Good to see you all, and I'm sorry I was late. But so I will be moving up to Chico, and I'm right now in Oakland, and so just generally, I have a large lot along West Lindo Avenue, and I'm a little I'm concerned out honestly about the trees that are along the channel,
Right.
more than maybe even my own property. But I have a chance to do kind of a bit of a clean slate, when I go. And are you finding that there are people who are kind of specializing now? Are there people who are consulting on this kind of landscape up there? I would imagine so. It's at a kind of new area where if I, when I want to change things and plant, I have people to consult.
Mm-hmm.
A large number.
Master gardeners are a good resource. I will say that. In fact, Joyce and I are members of a committee with about a dozen people that's what we're focusing on. So there's that. California Native Plant Society is another excellent resource. Those are both free. And the Native Plant Society has a couple of great publications that they've made available to the public. I'm not familiar. I'm sure there are landscapers that are on this, but it's a fairly new idea, this idea of Firewise landscaping. I'm not personally familiar with anybody. I would have to go search. We actually have a couple of landscapers who are master gardeners that if you were to contact us by email, I'm sure we could talk to them and see if they have any and give you an answer there.
Kendall, there's also excellent, I'm a Native Plant Society member too, but we happen to have a local native plant nursery that's huge. It's just north of Chico, and they do sell to the public, but they also sell to a lot of landscapers. So they're great. They have huge property. They moved out of town in order to expand. I just was there maybe a month ago with my sister, and it's amazing. They have huge greenhouses. So if you're interested, I can send you the address. It's called Floral. Used to be on Floral, but now it's on Meridian.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah.
Nursery, and it's awesome. And they're extremely knowledgeable people who work there.
And we also have a demonstration garden that's a work in progress, but we have four well-developed gardens, Mediterranean, Butte County All-Stars, and 2 different native gardens. One's native wildlife garden and the other's just native plants that you can see at Patrick Ranch. You might want to note that. And it's open most mornings. There's usually, and then in weekends, they man the visitor center, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They do. They're open to the public again.
Yeah, and public can just, usually there's nobody there as far as master gardeners unless we're working on the property. But if you are there and you see somebody puttering around in the gardens, feel free to ask them questions because they're a master gardener and they wouldn't be there unless they loved what they were doing out there. So,
Is there any sort of entity, I know Kendall was just talking about like Lindo Channel, where you got a city-owned easement or somebody else and you don't control that property? Is there any kind of entity that'll work with you? Like if you're willing to foot the bill or do some of the work and get approval from whoever owns or controls that easement to thin stuff out and build your barrier a little bit further out, but it's on public lands.
right.
Is there any kind of like a nonprofit or anybody working on that issue right now?
The people I would talk to about that would probably be Butte Fire Safe Council.
Yeah, and we have a contact who actually works on our team, Ben Hart, and
Right.
he works with homeowners for that specifically. So let me give you he's actually was hoping to, he works for Butte Fire Safe Council and the forestry. He's got 2 jobs basically, but
Yeah.
Ben Hart would be a contact and
I think Kendall's the one that needs that one, because if I was in her shoes, I definitely want to be doing that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It depends. City of Chico, I've called about, because they have a big, huge tree planting project in the city. And they will come and plant trees free because they're trying to repopulate the city. So that's another, I don't know if you're in the city limits there.
I live in Corning. I'm in a whole different
Right.
setup, Tama County.
Right.
And other than a wide open grass fields adjacent, that's my major issue. It's just fast moving grass fires.
Right.
So it's pretty easy there. I just cut out a swath, like it's not even on my land. I go into that field 100 feet, we cut it back, and we haven't had any issues. The city likes us doing that anyway. So
Right.
there's a city ordinance that by the end of, I can't remember the date, in June, every property owner that has a field has to mow a perimeter around
Right.
all empty fields. And then they also have to exit down the middle and through depending on the size of the field. So that's been pretty successful.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
The other issue I do have in Corning, and my house is basically built into an orchard. So I have like a dozen olive trees that are my immediate landscaping.
Mhm.
And we've had this discussion before. For pruning purposes for harvest, they kind of keep them pruned low because you want to access the fruit. But for fire, you need to prune them up high to stop coming up from the ground. So there's always that little battle there of trying to find that sweet spot.
Right. And olives are so flammable too.
Yeah, they are very flammable. Yeah, once you get it into the orchard, it's you could be a goner.
But again, they're one of those that will crown sprout back after a fire too. They're pretty
Yeah, they're very
resilient.
hardy. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I prune them all up and I sucker them and all that kind of stuff. And they're pretty well spaced now because these trees are probably more than 100 years old. So they're pretty hardy trees. So.
Mhm. Mhm.
Well, and to answer the question that was posed, West Lindo is the border, the north border of the Chico town line.
So are you inside or outside?
I'm in. I'm it. Yeah.
Well,
So
welcome to Butte County eventually. My
what
daughter.
now? What was
My
that?
daughter lives in Pinole, so we're down there quite a bit.
Oh, yeah. So you know the area.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, there'll be a little getting used to maybe what plants are going to thrive in the higher heat, but I've already been doing some landscaping here. So yeah.
Kendall, another good resource would be, and I don't know if we've talked about it, but if you Google Butte County Master Gardeners,
Uh-huh.
we have a series of workshops. Most are right now on Zoom, but a couple are going to be, propagation is going to be in person. But we have one coming up in May with Cindy Weiner, who's with the Native Plant Society. And she's going to be, I think it's May 18th or May 20th, but check it out. And if it's something you're interested in, there's a lot of information on the local native plants that do well.
And I don't know anybody who knows her natives better than Cindy. She's
Yeah.
amazing.
That's great. Yeah, I have a feeling, you know, I'm watching this in advance of the move, and I still have a lot of stuff going on. So I'm not sure if I'm going to really be digging into this literally until I, you know, for maybe a good 8 months to a year. But I am thinking about it, and I'm kind of trying to develop a vision of what it's going to. Yeah, it's
Fall's the best time to get things in the ground
It
anyway.
is. You know, if you have a plan and it's an informed plan, you're in a much better shape.
yeah.
Like I said, I'm trying to retrofit after living there for 30 something years, and it's tough to make the decision to take out plants that you've nurtured for 30 something years. So yeah.
Yeah. You know, what's interesting is that the person who owned the place before me must have loved maples and planted them. I see the time, so I don't want to take up, but you know, I might contact some of the groups locally, because I think I'm going to have to take out a bunch of maples that are probably just getting to a point where they shouldn't be moved anymore. You know, they're getting to like 5 feet high,
Yeah.
6 feet, but they're really close together and they're almost like a border. It's really interesting.
Yeah, maples do tend to self-propagate pretty readily. So it could be they were volunteers.
Maybe. Anyway, it's not, thank you all. Thanks.
Thank you.
Just before we close, next week, we're going to be talking more about soil and erosion and a variety of mulches. So two master gardeners, Ann Osborne and excuse me, Candace Boggs, are going to be sharing some ideas and resources. Ann taught a workshop in the fall on composting and creating different types of compost. So we're going to be looking at that, restoring the soil and erosion and issues related to that after the fire in particular. So
Very good.
thank you, everybody, for being here, and we will see you next Tuesday. Thank you, Brent.
My pleasure. Glad to meet you all. I think I'll be seeing most of you later on this year. Is that correct? With the number 5?
Oh, yes, session 5. Yes.
Yeah.
Hard maintenance.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Thank
thank
you.
you.